we talked about this idea of growing on purpose. But what about sort of developing that a little bit before we go to our implementation groups, talking about growing for purpose? And I want to just show you this lovely sort of idea. I think it's this, that actually to make a decision to grow, one of the things that helps that is a sense of purpose. So it's not that we actually need a purpose to grow, but it definitely helps the growing process if we've got a reason. Does that make sense? Now, that reason may be very generic. So that reason can be, I just want to be a better person. That's a good reason to grow. Or that element of growth may be around very specific senses of direction for our lives. But giving ourselves a sense of purpose for growth is so important. I love this idea in the ministry of Jesus. When he's 12 years old, his mother and father find him after leaving him behind in the temple, and they sort of challenge him. And they say to him, hey, you know, more or less, they said, where have you been? What have you been up to? And he says this, didn't you know that I had to be about my father's? Now, some translations have father's business. Other translations have father's house. The reason for the difference is there's no contradiction. The reason for the difference is that neither the word house nor business is in the text. So what the translators have tried to do is give us a sense of what did Jesus mean here. And actually, if you just interpret it as Jesus said it, it's very powerful. Though he's in the temple, he's saying this, as a 12-year-old boy, I've got a sense of what the Father wants for me. I've got a sense of his purpose for my life. And that's an amazing statement in its own right, which has huge implications on things like how even we disciple young people and our expectation of young people. Can we have a higher expectation of young people younger? Because here's Jesus at 12. I know Jewish culture was a little bit different, but Jesus at 12 had an understanding of the purpose of the Father in his life. Right? So is it possible for a 12-year-old to get a sense of understanding? I lament the fact that we've invented this teenage culture, that we've invented a culture that almost excuses some of our most innovative and ingenious talent in our churches to sort of waste chunks of their life because, well, I'm a teenager. And actually, of course, in biblical culture, teenagers didn't exist. They went from child to man, child to woman, literally in a day. There was a rites of passage, a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, and they literally went from a child to a man. Paul refers to this. When I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke of a child, but now that I've become a man, I've put away childish things. So there's this crossing over moment. Jesus, the text tells us, was still a boy. That's how he's referred to in this text. So we're suspecting he hasn't had that crossover moment, which for young men tended to happen at around about 13 years of age. So here's a remarkable idea that Dr. Luke gives us in the detail, that as a boy, Jesus has a sense of his purpose. Okay? Now, if we grab that idea, then the next bit where it says, and Jesus grew in wisdom, stature, favor with God, favor with man, maybe that growing, deliberate, intentional growing, relates back to this idea of direction and purpose that Jesus has. And I think even for leaders, this is a remarkable idea for us, that we need to think about why we're growing. If you have a strong why, then you'll do it. Yes? At the moment, I'm not a member of a gym because of where I live. It's a bit difficult to get to a gym. So I used to be a member of a gym. I'd sort of just do my own little workout now and stuff like that, keep myself fit. But I used to love going to the gym. I was a member of a gym for about 8 years where I lived previously, and absolutely loved it and really enjoyed it. But I noticed there were 2 spikes in the year, in the United Kingdom anyway, when we had a huge influx of people joining the gym and then leaving again. So they would join in January, New Year's resolution, too much turkey and whatever over Christmas. And so I want to be a new person. I want to get my life into shape. And so they would join the gym. And then, of course, the other time of the year, yeah, just before summer. Now, we don't really have a summer, so I don't know. Do you know, people said, it's a bit cool here at the moment. We're entering winter. I have no sympathy for you whatsoever. You're not getting any sympathy from me. This is not winter. This is British summer right now. This outside. We would have a barbecue right now outside. This is British summer. So Brits would sort of try and trim up for summer because they want to get into their Speedos or their bikinis. They want the body of a god on the beach. You know what it's like. So there we go. And here's what we found. Here's the pattern I saw. People would explode into action, go at it for a month, and then they would disappear. And the reason for that was their why wasn't strong enough. All right? So you can develop a why that can give you a spurt of growth for a month. But as leaders, we're not just thinking about the next month. We're thinking about the next 5 years, next 10 years. So one of my jobs is at one church is coaching our core team. So I do personal development plans for at least 6 members of the team where I'm just coaching them and helping them with their backstage stuff, right? So I'm doing that. And all the time I'm telling them that when I'm helping to coach them, this is not about today. This is about 5 years' time. This is about 10 years' time. You're doing stuff now that's going to pay off, not just today. Hopefully there's a payoff today, but you're going to do stuff that will pay off in the next 5 or 10 years. And that's the attitude we get from Jesus. His growing is long-term growing. He's not just trying to grow quickly. How do we grow leaders quickly? Wrong question. Right? I mean, humans, on average, cook for 9 months in their mother's womb. There's a reason for that. It takes 18 years to grow them into adulthood. There's a reason. There's a reason for that. Do you understand? There's some things that can't be rushed. They're actually meant to take a bit of time. And growth as a leader is not about speed. It's about purpose. It's about intention. It's about asking the questions, if I do what I'm doing now, what will this look like? Not just today, hopefully there's a benefit, but what will this look like tomorrow? What will this look like in a year? What will this look like in 5 years? And that's what I'm thinking all the time. I'm doing things today that are giving me some payoff, but they're also going to pay off in the months and years to come. So we're thinking about tomorrow, not just today. And when we're discipling other people, we're trying to move away from this sort of gym, get your body in shape for the summer idea, and we're trying to get them into, it's just a good idea to commit yourself to this long-term commitment of growth and development. Now, the only way that young people that we're discipling are going to get into that is if they have a sense of purpose, a sense of a why. Why do I want to grow? Does that make sense? And so let me just pause here and hold this idea. So I'm assuming that everyone in the room, although maybe I shouldn't make this assumption, but I would assume everyone in this room has a sense of purpose to what we're about. But you will be leading young people who will be struggling with that sense of purpose. Not even some young people, maybe some middle-aged people who are still trying to discover who and what they are and what their purpose is. And I've been through this with my own children and young people where they've asked me, how do I find God's purpose? Now, of course, the easy answer is pray and God will speak. All right, so that's the easy answer. But here's what I'm discovering with lots of people. Even when they do pray, they're not always clear. So what do we do while we're waiting for God to speak to them? How can we help them? And for my own kids and for people that I try and coach and develop, I ask a series of questions. And this might be helpful for you in discipling others, or even helpful for you personally right now in terms of your own journey. And here's the question I would ask. First question I would ask is, in discovering your purpose, what gifts do you have? So my theology would say this, that when I was conceived in my mother's womb, that the fingers of God were at work. Now, I am a product genetically of two humans, but the Bible says that somehow mystically and gloriously, God got involved in my creation. And I believe that the thing that God was weaving into me was my personhood, right? Not my genetics, not what I looked like. I think that's the product of my parents. But I think God was weaving something of my personhood into shape within me. And that passage in Psalm says this, that not only am I fearfully and wonderfully made, but it says that God has a book for me, that he's written for me. Now, I interpret that as God's preferred purpose for my life. So here's my theology, and you, again, feel free to throw this out or accept this or work with this. My theology is this, that if God has a book for me, then when he was weaving things into my life when I was cooking in my mother's womb, he was putting things in me that was for that book. Okay, does that make sense as a theological leap? So if he's written a book, then it makes sense that if he's involved in my creation, in what way is he involved? Well, my mum and dad were involved genetically, but he's involved in some way at putting God's stuff inside me, elements inside me that are for the book that he's written for me. So if you accept my logic, then my logic is this, that if I truly look inside myself, then the gifts that I have could be a reflection of the type of purpose to which I'm called. Does that make sense? All right, now you feel free to. So let me give you an example of this. My youngest daughter, 17 years of age now, when she was 13, she was making some choices for education. She wanted to be a vet back then. So that's what she wanted to be, and that's fine by us. We were cool with that. But before she made her choices, I said to her, will you come out for ice cream and have a chat with me? I want to talk to you about your choices. So we went out for ice cream. We chatted together. I said, now listen, if you want to be a vet, I'm absolutely 100% supporting that. So that's great. And we'll lock that down for a serious future that you're going to have. But before you make your choices, can I tell you what gifts I think you have, what I see when I look at you? And so I described the gifts I saw. So the stuff that was coming out of her, I described. Now, could my daughter have been a great vet? Yes, probably. But actually the gifts that I was seeing was more to do with people than with animals. And the gifts that I was seeing was more to do with leadership than serving the animal kingdom. Do you understand? And so someone has to do that. I'm cool with that. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But you know what I mean? And so I just put that to her, and I left that with her. And actually, she went away, talked to some other people, processed that, and made a huge life shift decision, based on a recognition of the gifts inside her. Now, if you spoke to my daughter, and you said, at 13, did God speak to you? No. So what prompted the shift of direction? A recognition of gifts. So if our theology allows us for that idea that my gifts match my potential purpose, then could it be helping people discover their purpose? One way is helping them to unearth the gifts they have. Now, not the gifts they would like, but the gifts they have. Does that make sense? Second wee question is this: what fills your tank? Now, this is slightly more subjective, but what I mean by this is this: what sort of thing, provided it's moral and legal, right? What sort of thing, when you do it, fills you up? Now, this is an important idea, because I believe that if we are connecting, at least broadly, with the purpose of God for our life, even though physically we can be empty at the end of the day, your heart should be full. Now listen to me, men and women of God. If your heart is consistently empty, something is not right. You have to have the courage. If you are consistently empty on the inside, you have to have the courage to flag that with somebody. And you have to say, something's not right here. Okay, I'm either doing the right thing wrong, or I'm trying to do something that I think's the right thing, and it's not the right thing. Because here's what I believe. Now, again, this is my theology, so feel free, stick it in the bin, or go for it. It's my theology. If you're doing broadly, even broadly, the purpose that God has designed you for, it will fill you on the inside. Okay? So sometimes on social media, I use a little hashtag, and the hashtag is empty full, right? And what I mean by that is, I've had a day where I've given out, but my heart is absolutely energized. But can I say this? There are millions of people in our world who will go home tonight empty, empty. And that's the worst scenario for a human being. We weren't designed to work. We were designed for purpose. It's two different things. Hopefully they're the same thing. But there are millions of people working. It's not purpose. So, and it's possible even in Christian ministry to be working, and deep down you know, this is not working. Something's not right. I'm empty on the inside. Now listen to me. If that's you in this room, you have to have the courage at the very least to time out and ask the question, what's wrong here? I shouldn't be constantly, consistently, routinely feeling like this. We'll all have a day where we feel a bit empty on the inside because of life. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about consistently empty. Yes? And actually, when we're helping to disciple other people, here's what we're trying to do. Even if God hasn't spoken to them, we're trying to push them into the areas that fill them. Because here's what I've discovered. If people get filled, they're happier. If people get filled, they're more productive. If people get filled, they're more creative. They're more innovative. If they're doing stuff they love, they enjoy it better. When we launched our internship program at our church, we had a fantastic team who ran the mechanics of the internship program, but I drove the culture. I drove the philosophy. No one was taking that away because I wanted to make sure we were setting this properly. And there were some elements of culture I wasn't going to compromise on. And one was this. I said, I want these young people to do, in the year they're with us, I want them to do 60% of their time doing what they love. I don't want them to get to the end of this year and go, I hate the church. All right? So 40%, absolutely. Cleaning toilets, yeah. Putting the chairs out, yeah. Car park duty, yeah. Absolutely. But actually, what's the point in having an amazing young person with you for a year and you get them to do, most of the time they're with you for free, stuff they're not good at? That doesn't make sense to me. That's weird. Like someone's going to give you a year of their life free, and you get them doing stuff they're rubbish at. Am I the only one in the room that thinks that's crazy? I think that's bonkers. It's bonkers on two levels. Number one, it's hurting me because they're not doing what they're good at. Number two, they'll walk away from that year thinking, I never want to do that again. So for our interns, we made sure they had days off. We made sure they had evenings off. We made sure they had fun. We made sure they enjoyed themselves. They worked hard too, because we had a work hard culture. So they worked hard too, but we got them doing 60% of what they love to do. Every one of those first batch interns are all in Christian ministry today. Right? Because that was the ambition. The ambition wasn't, let's just work them to death. The ambition was, let's get them full. Let's get them full with purpose. Yes? So in helping disciple people to grow, we've got to try, what's your passions? What fills you? What do you love to do? And if we can, steer them in that direction. Does that make sense? Maybe not. Here's a third one. What do significant others see? So actually, if we're trying to help people find their purpose in God, a little thing can be, don't just listen to me. Maybe go to 2 or 3 other people in your world who are significant. That is, now by significant I mean they know how life works. They love Jesus passionately. And they're actually doing sort of purpose. All right? They've got a sense of, we know how this goes. All right? So don't just let them go to any old person who'll give them an opinion. Make them go to people who know how life works. And they asked this question, when you look at me doing what I do, what do you see? Now, this is not the word of the Lord. It's just a view. But here's what I think. Here's what I believe. If people are doing what they love to do consistently, the world around them will see that. Will start to observe that. So it was a bit like this with my daughter. You know, she wanted to be a vet, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't see vet. Because what she was doing was other things. She was naturally, without thinking about it, exploring her gifts. She was expressing her passions. So actually you're going, wow, maybe it's not this direction. Maybe it's another direction. Does that make sense? And so actually bringing people into that world and say, what do you see? And I'm here today in part, not just because of Jesus and the call of God in my life. I'm here in part because an older man in the church I grew up in saw something. Nobody else saw it. I didn't even see it at that stage. Or I didn't want to see it. I wanted to travel the world, but not as a preacher. I wanted to do something else. You know, so I didn't either want to see it or didn't see it. He saw something. He observed, and he started to coach that out. He started to draw that out of me. And actually, in part, I'm here today because that, as leaders, that's part of our role when discipling others, is that we're trying to coach them towards something. What do you see? What do you see? Help them to see that. And then lastly, we finish with the big question. What has God said? Now, I leave that question to the end, not because it's least important. It's probably the most important. But I leave that to the end for two reasons. Number one, I've met so many gorgeous, gorgeous followers of Jesus who have got stuck because God hasn't spoken. So if you make that number one question, they're stuck until God speaks. Now, I believe, so don't hear me wrong now, I believe that's the most important question, right? Ultimately, we've all got to answer that question. So I'm not putting it forth because it's least important. I'm putting it forth, it's the most important. But if we start with that, it often becomes a roadblock. People get stuck. And here's what I believe. If we can get people moving, there's a greater chance that they're open to God speaking. Or maybe more sensitive to hear. You know, it's easier to turn a car that's moving than to turn the wheel of a stationary car. You know, just get people moving in the right direction. Get them in the ballpark. All right? The Lord has an amazing ability to get people where they need to go. All right? So, but our job is to get them moving in the right direction. Not the direction we think is right for them, but the direction that we think is right for them, or that is right for them, not that necessarily we think is right. But what we see can be helpful for them. So what has God said? So leave that to the end, in a sense, because then people don't get stuck. Secondly, can I say this? And I'm speaking to Pentecostals, so let me say this. Sometimes people have said God said stuff. And like, if that's God, we're in trouble, right? You know, it's like he's having a moment. The Lord needs more coffee or something. There's something going on there. Because that's not God. That can't. And honestly, too many times, can I say this as a Pentecostal leader, too many times I've had to try and negotiate with someone who's, once someone plays the G card, what do you want me to do? God has said, okay, conversation over. Once you play the G card with me, there's no negotiation, right? Because I'm now arguing with God. Right? And so you're trying to say, look, if we put all the dots together, this doesn't look like God. Now I'm prepared to accept that God can do things we don't see coming, but here's what I believe. If God's really spoken to you, it should match the gifts he's given you. It should touch the passions within you, and it should be recognized by the significant spiritual people in your world. You know, it's just little markers. Now, it's not perfect. It's not an exact science. It's not out of the Bible, this. But it's just some practical markers to help us with the idea of pushing people into the right purpose. How did Jesus discover the purpose of God? Well, we want to believe that he went up a mountain and God just spoke. Or maybe he just went to the Bet Midrash and was memorizing Isaiah like Jewish boys did. And he heard the voice of God. Maybe he was just sitting with his father, talking about the scriptures, and God spoke. Maybe he was out working one day, and God, do you know, so this idea that you know, Jesus disappeared for days on end, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't, but I think Jesus caught the heart of God in the ordinary, in the everyday, in the routine, and somehow he understood what God wanted for him. So let me give you an example of that. My dad worked in the shipyard for years. If ever a man was designed not to work in the shipyard, you know, as humans came along the conveyor belt of creation, you know, shipyard, my dad was not on that conveyor belt because he was the antithesis of a shipyard worker. Everything the shipyard wanted and needed, my dad was not. But he had a mortgage to pay. He had kids to raise and very limited education. So he just had to. But here's what my dad did, amazingly, an incredible example to me. My dad would go to the shipyard every day, do a job that emptied him, and then what he did was he threw himself into his local church and did all the stuff that filled him. So he was he was a passionate children's worker. In fact, he would be so proud of my oldest daughter, who's a children's pastor. My dad was a fantastic children's worker, loved working with kids. So he would be out a couple of nights a week doing kids' events, like for free, for nothing, just serving. But I noticed as I look back, what he was doing something that was filling him to help him then do something that was sort of killing him. He was negotiating. The problem for many lovely people is they've no alternative negotiation. So all they've got is empty. They've nothing to fill them. And as a result, then, they really are empty. So maybe, you know, there's a man in your church, he can't change career, and he's a bit stuck, and he's a bit unhappy. But is there something we could give to him that helps him connect to stuff that brings him to life, that can then help him to go back to his career if he feels he can't change it? So there's ways around that obstacle if we want to help people. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let's keep moving, then we'll break. So let me just quickly say this, really, really quickly. In terms of growing for purpose, I think we need a plan. We'll come back to that right at the end of the day. We're going to look at a personal growth plan. But Jesus had a plan. And Jesus' plan was very, very simple. He grew in wisdom. He grew in stature. He grew in favor with God. He grew in favor with man. 4 dynamic areas of growth. So even if you're not a spiritual person, not a follower of Jesus, this is a great idea. So Jesus committed himself to growing intellectually. He committed himself to growing physically. The word there for stature just points to physical maturity, but the context is he's growing on purpose in physical maturity. And when you look at, for example, the physicality of Jesus, it's really outstanding. The stuff that Jesus does is quite remarkable, and his physicality is huge. So for example, to give you an idea, from Capernaum to Jerusalem, it's about 120 miles. Walking. So it says Jesus went to Jerusalem. You know, we just read that like he just popped around the corner to the local store. So Jesus walked there. From Nazareth to Capernaum, 40 miles on the trail. I mean, 20 miles direct as the crow flies, but we don't fly as crows. So it's a 40-mile sort of journey. You get the idea? Physically fit. Grew in favor with God. He learned to understand who God was, and he grew in favor with men. Now, we could spend a day on every one of those. But let me summarize the ideas in this. And this is a summary for me and you. There is a challenge on every leader in this room to grow in wisdom. Now, the growth in wisdom here is not just growth of information. So this is the Google generation, where they have more information than they can cope with. All right? Overexposed, in some cases slightly underdeveloped. So if we need information, we just go to Google. But we're not talking about information. We're talking about wisdom that moves from an idea to a lifestyle. So this idea that nothing is taught until it is learned, and nothing is learned until it is lived. That's the wisdom we're after. So as leaders, We're not just trying to grow in the accumulation of our knowledge. Can I say this to you really carefully without someone beating me up afterwards? It's not how many books you read, it's how well you read them. No point reading 5 books. Yeah, I know some of you would like that. But there's no point reading 5 books a month if it's just information in your brain. That's not the point that we're engaged with. We're not just simply accumulating knowledge. The point of reading a book is to pull that knowledge into our everyday expression, to change the way we live. There's no point reading the Bible in a year if we forget most of it. The point is not speed. The point is growth. I would rather you read the Bible slower, but grow. So I'm reading the Bible today slower than I've ever read it. And can I say this? Without exception, every day, I'm hearing something in the book. Every day, I'm getting something. Every day, I'm nudged on an issue. Every day, without exception. Okay? So that's an important idea for us in our own growth and development. Secondly, can I say this? Don't want to offend anybody or push this in the wrong direction, but your physicality is part of your spirituality. Now, we're not talking here about waistline. We're talking about well-being. But can I say this, leaders, listen to me carefully. Your physicality has to be led. You have to take responsibility for what's going in your mouth, how much is going in your mouth, why it's going in your mouth, how often it's going in your mouth. Are you with me? Your body is the only body you're going to get. Now, can Jesus use us if our body was broken or disabled? Of course he can. So do not hear what I'm not saying. But if he's given you a physicality, it is our responsibility to treat that physicality as part of the front stage, backstage management. You can't ignore your body. Your body is your physical vehicle for the spiritual purpose for which God has called you. So if I hurt my body unnecessarily, feed my body with junk, don't exercise my body, those decisions could jeopardize the will of God for my life. Now, so it's not that I have to be size 0, thank God. And I've raised, Dawn and I've raised 2 girls in a world that obsesses over superficial nonsense. We've got to resist that superficial nonsense. But in rejecting the superficiality of a world that wants girls to look like twigs, right? We do not reject a proper spirituality that says my physicality is part of my worship of God. So we've got to get the tension right. Okay? And we must be careful because the neglect of our physicality not only hurts us, but it can say something to our disciples. If we're trying to encourage people to walk in some measure of self-leadership and self-control and self-management, and in areas perhaps of our physicality, we are clearly not doing that, it can undermine us a little bit. Now, please, again, don't fall out with me on that. Don't hear what I'm not saying, but we've got to take that seriously. And Jesus, I think, took that seriously. All right? Okay. Jesus grew in favor with God. Can I say this as leaders? Listen, you are spiritual first and leaders second. You weren't born a leader, but you were born spiritual. When I say you weren't born a leader, what I mean is you weren't born leading, I should say. But you were born spiritual. So you're spiritual first and you're a leader second. And in ministry, there have been moments where leadership has eclipsed my spirituality. It's driven my spirituality. It's hijacked it. Can I be really vulnerable with you? I have backslidden in ministry. Now, by backsliding, I don't mean I've been shooting drugs, getting drunk, or having sex with the secretary. Haven't done any of those things. All right? Genuinely. So just put that on the record. Live long and prosper. Okay, so no, I haven't done any of those things. But my heart's been cold. My attitude has sucked. I've lived in unforgiveness. I've been bitter. I have backslidden in ministry. Now, nobody, because I can game face, and I've learned to game face, and every one of us can game face, because I've learned to do that, people didn't notice who see me from a distance. But I have had moments where I have backslidden in ministry. Got away with it, because God's good. You with me? So my primary commitment is not to leadership. My primary commitment is to my spirituality, my walk with God, my love for God. Because someone rips the badge off you, and that happens. I've had a couple of badges taken off me. Someone takes the badge off you, and what you're left with is what you have. And there are many people in ministry, the badge gets taken off, and that's it. They've nothing. Why? Because everything was built around the badge. The badge is just a badge. Okay? But your walk with God will hold you no matter what. And I know I'm speaking to the converted. I get it. But we're not careful. Busyness, life, ministry, traveling, all the cool stuff that God lets us do because we're leaders. If we're not careful, all of that takes us away from the moments of just walking with God in deep spirituality, which we've got to continue to nurture. Does that make sense to you? I know you know this. And then lastly, grow in favor with men. So grow in favor with men, EQ, emotional quotient. So we've got IQ, intellectual quotient, SQ, spiritual quotient. We've got PQ, physical quotient, growing with God, in favor with God, spiritual quotient, and then growing in favor with men, emotional quotient. So you've got those four elements of growth: intellectual, physical, spiritual, and emotional. Forgive me if my slide misled you there. And here's what we've got to remember as leaders. Ultimately, whatever badge we wear, people are our business. So can I just say this? If you are an Ephesians 4:11 gift ministry, your primacy is not apostle. Your primacy is people. You just happen to be called to apostle people. If you're a teacher, your primacy is not your intellectual growth. Your primacy is people. Do you understand? When we take the 4:11 gifts away from people, they become weird. They become dangerous. They become brutal. Prophets that don't mix with people are to be avoided at all costs. Do you understand? Because they're not thinking about people. They're just obsessed with the word, and they just loose it and cut people in half. And just, listen, we're not here to cut people in half. Even if you're a prophet, our job as a prophet is to build people up. Our job as a prophet is to get people to where God wants them to go. So whatever your gifts are, it's about people, and we can learn to be good with the people around us and to support them and help them. And my personality type, you know, I've had to learn to be better with people. So I'm naturally introvert, believe it or not. So I'm a natural introvert. If you do the Myers-Briggs with me, I sit on the introverted scale, which means I draw energy from myself. So I don't mind being alone, okay? But I've learned to negotiate with people because ultimately people are our business. Make sense? Persistence is the other thing. Let me close with this idea as we break. The third thing about this idea of growing for purpose is persistence. That we've got to think about our growth in the longer term. We get very discouraged about what we have or haven't achieved in the short term, but we've got to think about the longer term. A friend of mine would say this to me. He said, the actions of your today prophesy to your tomorrow. So they're prophesying about what this is going to look like. And when we come to Jesus, of course, we've got this incredible idea that Jesus grows for 18 years in silence. I mean, we know he does. We've got some clues in the gospel as to what he does, but by and large, 18 years relative silence. All we know is he grows. All we know is that he's growing in wisdom somehow. He's growing in stature. He's growing in favor with God. He's growing in favor with men. So that when he steps into his arena of purpose, Jesus is ready. Now, here's the thought for you. If Jesus lets you live another 5, 10, 15, 20, or 30 years, what patterns of growth and development are we putting into our world? What mentalities are we putting in that are going to help us take advantage as we go forward in him? I'm 51 years of age, and I'm hoping I'm going to get to do this when I'm 60 or 65 or maybe 70. You know, my body might slow down a bit, but I hope I've got something in terms of my mind and my heart and my spirituality that I can still pass on to the next generation and still help grow people and still help invest in people. So I'd love to be still doing this. So if I'm serious about maybe the next 20 years still, then I've got to be serious about today, but being consistent with my growth patterns and moving forward in God. And in our next session, we'll talk about the power of rhythm and how that can help us actually do that. Last quote, and it's this. This is a quote from Bill Hybels' church, Courageous Leadership. He's quoting a guy called D. Hawk, who's a leader and business consultant. And he says this: "It is the management of self that should occupy 50% of our time and the best of our ability." Now, the first reaction to that is, whoa, that's a lot. But it depends how you interpret growth. It depends how you interpret what growth is. If you're pulling all of your world into the journey of growing yourself, then actually, as we'll see when we feed back together, maybe that's not a ridiculous idea after all. Whether you agree with the 50% or not, I would say this, that as leaders, we need to be intentional about the time we're giving to our own growth and development. If you don't pay attention to your own growth and development, generally nobody else will. And the only time someone else will pay attention to your growth and development is when something goes wrong. And then that's too late. So I've just accepted, not cynical, just accepted this idea. Can I say this carefully? Nobody really will care. So I've got to care. Nobody's going to get me out of the bed in the morning to do my exercises, so I've got to do them. No one's going to watch over me when I read my Bible. No one's going to check on me when I'm worshiping the Lord. No one's going to look at me when I'm organizing my finances to honor God. No. So actually, I've got to do that, and I've got to take responsibility for that, and that's at the very heart of this journey. And Jesus seems to be able to do that, and he did it consistently for 18 years and was ready.